But we're experiencing today an enhanced version of what has been going on throughout Earth's history. We are at war. Would you agree with me? Now, you may not understand it exactly the direction I'm going to take this, but we are at war, and for me, involved with education the way I have been over the last 38 years, I see something that is very disturbing to me. Our children are leaving the church. And I ask my question, why have all the children gone? Before they reach the age of 20, over 50% of our young people will leave this church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Does that disturb you at all today? Well, I would say to you, I hope in your mind you are asking the same question. Why is this the case? And it goes back to our first slide. It's because of war. But the interesting thing is, this war between good and evil, as we see it going on today, began in, of all places, heaven. Do you think about that often? That this war between good and evil began in heaven itself. And it says, and there was war in heaven, and the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth, how much? The whole world. And we happen to be in the world, and so he works on us too, right? This con man is good enough at what he does that he actually was able to talk a third of the angels out of the very presence of God. He was good enough that he talked our first parents out of the Garden of Eden. Why would we ever make that trade? Because he is good at manipulating our minds. So, what is this war all about? Then I would take you back to the statement I just made. The war is for the mind. This space up here. That is it. Whatever happens, happens because of what takes place in our brains here as human beings. And this is what we're told. Satan invents unnumbered schemes to occupy our minds, that they may not dwell upon the very work with which we ought to be best acquainted. He knows with him how much? Everything depends on his diverting minds from Jesus and the truth. That is it. If he can keep our minds focused on something else, he doesn't have to worry. And he doesn't care what it is, as long as we are not focused upon Jesus Christ and what he has done for us, and the mission that Jesus Christ has asked us to carry on. Then he succeeds, whatever it may be. Proverbs 23:7, you know it well. It says, what a man thinks in his heart, that's right, so is he. Whatever goes in up here then makes us what we are. So our kids today are surrounded. Wherever they turn, they are surrounded from the time they get up, in whatever state it may be, until the time they go to sleep at night. They are bombarded by voices that are trying to guide them in all kinds of directions. And I want to help you see the challenge that these young people are facing today. The media is incredible. I can take this little device right here and go anywhere in the world I want to go. And so media has a profound impact upon these young people. They have grown up with it. They are what are called digital natives. I'm a digital immigrant. However, I have successfully immigrated into the digital world. I love it. It allows me to do what I do around this union and still be effective. You see what is here? See that little girl right there and this little fella? Have you ever watched what happens to them when you put an iPad in front of them? And how long it takes for them to figure it out? It doesn't take them long at all. They know what's going on. They can figure out these kind of things very quickly. And parents provide media for their children, but they really have no idea where these children go with the media in many respects. And then you have music, another part of the media. What did Satan do when he was in heaven? What was one of the responsibilities he had? Choir leader, wasn't he? So he knows the impact of music, and he uses it very effectively. Do you know the average kid today spends 7.5 hours with digital information every day? 7.5 hours. Now, they say that they consume 10.5 hours of information through multitasking. And let me help you understand how a teenager gets up in the morning. When they wake up, what do you think one of the very first things is that they do? And do what? Who? Exactly. Who's up? What's going on? And then all of a sudden it hits them, man, I got to do my homework. I forgot to get it all done. So they're over at the computer. They have their phone there because they're texting their friends while they're working on the computer. They probably have an earbud listening to music while the television's on. That's the world they're in. That explains what is happening to our kids today. And by the way, did I mention that this was outside of school time? So 7.5 hours of literal time, 10.5 hours of actual multitasking throughout the day, consuming media. And then by the time they're 17, they've watched, or I guess it's 18, they've watched 17,000 hours of television. About 3 hours a day average. And my mind, I was trying to figure out whether or not I could believe Seventh-day Adventist young people didn't spend that much time every day watching television, but I've kind of given up on that. If you go to a home today, you find a television in just about every room, don't you? And you got to stay up on the news and whatever else. And so they're bombarded with that television. And it's interesting, when you see these kind of things, you have, these are probably not even on television lately, but Heroes, Haunted, I think that was called Buffy the Vampire Slayer or something of that nature. And then you have the Ghost Whisperer. What commonality do you have there? Spiritualism. Right into the home. It seems that every facet of what we do nowadays almost is affected by the supernatural out there. Our young people are becoming conditioned, right along with us, to this type of thing being natural. Satan is setting the stage very subtly for things that we know are coming. And then you have Hollywood's battle for the mind, and by the way, they're very clear about that. A co-worker of mine, Gene Brewer, goes to brain conferences because he's very interested in what goes on in the brain as an educator. And he was out in San Diego at this brain conference, and there was a gentleman sitting beside him who he began to talk with during a break. And he asked him, he said, "Where are you from?" And he says, "I'm from Hollywood." Hollywood? What are you doing in a brain conference? And his comment was disturbing because we want to know how people think. We want to impact how they think and be able to get them to these movies so we can get into their wallet. They want to manipulate people. Do you think they're successful today? Every time you turn around, and by the way, I realize these are outdated as well. They'd probably be outdated last week. Every time you turn around, there's another movie you just have to see, right? And our kids are compelled to go and see these. These movies are things that Hollywood wants people to come and pay money. Millions of dollars every weekend. All young people that are here today, I want you to realize something. And that is, Superman, or Spider-Man, or the Hulk, or even Walker, Texas Ranger. These individuals are not superheroes, but they're portrayed as such. I want to tell you, there is only one superhero that has ever existed on this planet. And that is Jesus Christ, and He died for us 2,000 years ago. Our young people have to know that and realize that. It is our job to make sure that our young people of this church, those precious souls that have been entrusted to our care, realize this. And as I go about and I see the outcome of the work of this church through the years past, and I see the leaders of today, Kirby Gray Jr., David, Robin, and others that are helping lead out in this church, and Chris, that are remaining faithful. They've found their place in God's work. It is our job to take these young people that are coming up today to continue the challenge of directing them to Jesus Christ. But I want to tell you, our kids are being raised in Generation Me. Have you heard of Generation Me? If you have not heard of Generation Me, you are in it. There's a book actually called Generation Me. It was quite interesting. I had to get it. And it says why today's young Americans are more confident, assertive, entitled, and more miserable than ever before. What a conundrum to be in. And the writer, Dr. Twenge, did some research that covered 6 decades involving 1.3 million people, showing how this country successfully developed the Generation Me. The author says, today's young people speak the language of self as their native tongue. You know how I know that? When I went to school, maybe even Chris, when you went to school, it was Chris and I. How is it today? Yeah, it's me and Chris. Have you noticed that? How that turned around? It's a subtle thing. It's not a big thing necessarily, but it's their language. The individual has always come first, and feeling good about yourself has always been the primary virtue for Generation Me. They are not self-absorbed. They are self-important. That's Generation Me. And here's what she said that really struck me. The society that molds you when you are young stays with you the rest of your life. You can look back in the day, can't you? And see how you were a product of what took place during that time? Our young people are no different today. Steps to Christ says, the warfare against self is the greatest battle that was ever fought. And I don't know about you, but I fought it already today. Guard your heart, your mind, above all else, for it determines the course of your life. I would submit to you today that it is the home, the school, and the church that helps safeguard these young people. The con man is really good at what he does. And here's a little bit of a test to help you with understanding that. Who made this statement? I believe today that my conduct is in accordance with the will of the Almighty Creator. Anybody have a clue who might have said that? Would it ever occur to you that it might be this individual? Can you see how Satan works a person to where they're doing what this man did and be able to make that kind of statement? But he's not alone. Today, all I have to do is put that up there and it conjures up all kind of thoughts, does it not? In mental pictures. Pictures such as these. We all saw them in the news. And my question that I would ask is, why would a young man like this take a weapon like that and shoot a child like that? How could that be done? It doesn't even compute up here. But let's go back a little further. Solomon, I believe he was the second wisest man that ever lived. There was one more wise than him, right? Jesus Christ himself. But Solomon was a very intelligent individual, and yet Satan played him like a puppet. And here's what happened. He who in his early reign had displayed so much wisdom and sympathy in restoring a helpless babe to its unfortunate mother, fell so low as to consent to the erection of an idol to whom living children were offered as sacrifices. Did you know that? That is incredible. We would say, well, he ought to know better. But Satan is good at what he does. And they had these great edifices out there where they would carry out these types of ceremonies. A.T. Jones, in a sermon series on righteousness by faith, sermon number 18, he had this text: the heart is deceitful above what? All things, and desperately wicked. Now, I want to just give you a little interaction here that he had between himself and his congregation. He said, deceitful above how many things? Congregation, all things. All things, congregation, yes. Above Satan even? The congregation, yes. And here's what he said. Our hearts will deceive us quicker and more often than Satan will. Have you thought about that before? That in reality we blame lots of things on Satan that we have conjured up ourselves. We are products of sin. And so are our children. And so a daily walk with Jesus is our only hope. But my question to you is it possible today for young people to hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil, when they can have this in their hand wherever they go? That's a big challenge. Patriarchs and Prophets says, it is a law of the human mind that by beholding we become what? Changed. That's exactly right. And so what goes in here changes people, changes our young people, molds them into what they are going to become and what they are. So Satan, who talked a third of the angels out of heaven, and he talked our parents out of the Garden of Eden, I would ask you, what hope is there for our youth today? That's a dismal picture, is it not? And yet, have you heard of the Value Genesis study? Anybody here heard of that? Few of you have heard of it. The Value Genesis study is the largest study ever done by any church organization to see how the home, the church, and the school impacted their young people. And here's what they told us. They said, if my home, my school, and my church, and here's the key, work effectively together, there is a 99% probability that I will have an intrinsic faith in Jesus Christ. Those three entities. And so we're going to take a little bit of time to talk about those three entities. Council of Parents, Teachers, and Students says, only the power of God can save our children from being swept away by the tide of evil. The responsibility resting upon parents, teachers, and church members to do their part in cooperation with God is greater than words can express. This rests upon each and every one of us here today. Now, I dare say there's some individuals here who would recognize what this is. What is it? Milking stool. It seems like today they do things different, but back in the day, that's what they sat on to milk cows. And so I would submit to you that you have this three-leg stool, and it is one of the legs are home, the other one the school, and the third one would be the church in developing this intrinsic faith in Jesus. Let's say one of those legs were removed. What would happen? It would fall down, wouldn't it? And that's the same thing that takes place in the lives of our young people. I want to spend a moment on the home first. Too much importance cannot be placed on the early training of children. The lessons that the child learns during the first 7 years of life have more to do with forming his character than what? All that it learns in future years. The first 7 years right in the home. The influence of a carefully guarded Christian home in the years of childhood and youth is the surest safeguard against the corruptions of this world. Be it media or whatever. God's power is stronger than any media out there, my friends. But He expects us to work in cooperation with Him to shape the lives of our children. George Barna did a study on young people, and he said by age 13, a child has developed the value system that they will die with. Is that biblical? How do you know that? All right, but when you look at the Jewish economy, at what time did a child become a man? Yeah. 12 years old. So that's biblical. They have the value system they will die with. Only by the grace of God will we change after that as adults. Patriarchs and prophets tells us there is no higher trust than committed to fathers and mothers in the care and training of their children. Parents have to do with the very foundations of habit and character. By their example in teaching, the future of their children is largely decided. A heavy responsibility. So how do parents do this? How do Seventh-day Adventist parents develop this value system in their children? I would submit to you that the Bible is pretty clear on that. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 7 has this to say, Hear, O Israel, and we are Israel, are we not? The Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. How often is that? All the time. It is a 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, evangelistic series in the home. Guiding and shaping the lives of our children. And I want to thank you again for what this church has done for those that I am aware of. And I know there are many others. But remain faithful. You have children amongst you today. In this time of peril, fathers and mothers must arouse and work as for life, or many of the youth will be forever lost. We must take this to heart, my friends. This is a challenge to you and I today. Let's take a look at the school. I say to parents, if the battle is for the mind, and it is, right? I would say to you, it matters where your children go to school. You cannot have a child in a place for 6 hours a day and not believe that their lives will not be impacted by what goes on there. They will be affected. So it does matter where your children go to school. It is very important to realize that in a Seventh-day Adventist school, each and every day, Jesus Christ is invited into the classroom. And I really like this quote. It was on a bulletin at a church that I went to and preached at a few weeks ago. All who engage in ministry are God's helping hand. They are co-workers with the angels. Rather, they are the human agencies through whom the angels accomplish their mission. Angels speak through their voices and work by their hands. So it matters to have Seventh-day Adventist teachers standing up in front of your young people in the classroom every day, knowing that they have invited Christ into their own lives and into that classroom. The Lord would use the school as an aid to the parents in educating and preparing their children for this time before us. Nothing is of greater importance than the education of our children and young people. Now, that's not to say that that's the only thing, but nothing is of more importance than that. Back in the day, when the first school was started, it was started by Martha Byington. She was 19 years old. Back in 1853, she taught in the home of her uncle, Aaron Hilliard, in Bucksbridge, New York. She had 13 students. It was 158 years ago. What a blessing to have Seventh-day Adventist education. But what has happened in the ensuing 158 years? Well, we now have 7,804 schools worldwide. We have 84,997 teachers. We have over 1,673,828 students, because these numbers are a little bit aged, a couple, 3 years. Do you think God has blessed the work of education? Absolutely. And what a change it has made in the lives of so many young people. I am a product of that myself, and probably many of you sitting here today. Why were Seventh-day Adventist schools started? To provide an environment that is free of harassment for our children. Because back in the day, it was difficult for our children to attend public schools without being derided. And that teaches our beliefs as a Seventh-day Adventist church. That provides true education. And true education we know as the harmonious development of what? Yes, the physical, the mental, and the spiritual. All three of those are critical to the lives of our children. Romans 12:2 was read today. Don't copy the behaviors and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. And that is a daily process. And by being in a Seventh-day Adventist school, it provides opportunities over and over for our young people to see, hear, think about, and decide for Jesus Christ. It is an opportunity for them to see that God has a place for them in His work. It's a 180-day evangelistic series every year. And I see sitting before me here young people that are products of that evangelistic series. So the most successful evangelistic series our church runs are what? There's two of them. What do you think they are? I've given you a pretty big clue here on one of them. All right? The school, and it's something that the church does. Pathfinders. Those two generate for our young people an environment that is conducive to make decisions for Jesus Christ. Cognitive Genesis is another study that was done, and it had a profound result. We discovered that all of our children, when we look at, we had 50-some thousand young people that were studied over 4 years. They tested categorically in all subject areas in any one of the classrooms a half a grade level above what they were expected to do. Does that impress anybody? Our schools are taking care of business. But here's something they told us. We found clear evidence that the longer children stayed in Seventh-day Adventist schools, the better they scored on national exams. In other words, our schools are taking care of business when it comes to education in itself. Some feel like our schools are not all that. I want to tell you, God has blessed our schools, and they're changing our young people's lives, not only for Him, but preparing them to be good citizens. Value Genesis also said there was a clear evidence that the longer our children remain in Seventh-day Adventist schools, the more likely it is they will stay in the church. They are telling that to us. We ought to listen, don't you think? And so we have the third leg of the stool, and that is the church. That's you, and that's me. Councils of Parents, Teachers, and Students says God has appointed the church as a watchman to have a jealous care over the youth and children, and as a what? Sentinel. To see the approach of the enemy and give warning of danger. But the church does not realize the situation. She is what? Sleeping on guard. Tony Campolo, who is a Christian sociologist in a Christian school, university, went back to the old stomping grounds in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And when he went there, he wanted to visit the old church that he used to attend. And this is what he found. And so he asked himself, why do churches die? And he got permission to go into this church, and he went down into the bowels of the church and looked around, and he found this file cabinet. And in that file cabinet, he found the baptismal records for the year that he was baptized. Here's what was scrawled in that file. There were only 3 conversions in the previous 12 months, and they were just children. Just children. And he goes, just children? One of those served as a missionary for years in Africa. The other one became a seminary president. And I dedicated myself to Christian higher education. They have changed the lives of thousands of people, but they were just children. So, he asked the question, what do they mean, just 3 children? He felt he had his answer as to why the church died. Because they had the mindset that those new members were just kids. We have to be very careful that that does not happen to us. That was their problem. But I will say to you that the Seventh-day Adventist Church has symptoms that are very similar. Do you know the average age for the membership of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the United States? Anybody care to venture a guess? "58 years old. Now, the interesting thing is I turned 63 back in April. So when I look at 58, 58 isn't all that, really. But if it's the average age of a church, that's a problem, is it not? It says something about the number of young people we're able to keep. And there are 1,000 churches in the United States that have no children. In the United States, 1,000 churches with not a single young person. The reason I know that is because the comment was there that said, there were not enough children to have a Sabbath school. How many children does it take to have a Sabbath school? One. I see the pastor's hand in the back saying one. Hallelujah, Pastor, you're exactly right. So that tells me there were no young people. What can be done? Here are some things that I would suggest. You've heard this term, use them or what? Exactly right. And folks, we are losing them because we're not using our young people. When I signed up to play ball, Kirby, I didn't sign up to do this. Did you? I wanted to play ball. I didn't want to be on the bench. But when we look at the church, here we have little Perk, just not quite good enough. So he's riding a pine. But I would submit to you, our youth stay on the bench because their talents are unrecognized and unused. Young people are talented, just like they were back in the day when we were out there on the hill, David. We were doing singing groups, and we had gymnastics teams, and back when it was over in Breakworth on West End, same thing. Carl Greek was leading out with gymnastic teams, and all kind of things were going on. Lives were changed for Jesus Christ. And they were standing up in front of the church, and they were leading out. Kids today can do it. And I would say to you that there are all kinds of things. There's a list of 13 that I know I have seen young people do every last one of these. They can make the difference. And I will tell you that youth can save churches. Now, it may be that some of you can remember when you were a senior in high school. I don't know. But when you become a senior in high school, something happens up here. And you develop this thing, there's all kind of terms for it, senioritis and whatever else. And I had my Bible class there, and I was teaching them Bible, and they were whining, complaining about having to go over, and this was at Fletcher Academy at the time. They were having to go over to that church with all those people with white hair. We want our own church. So I got to thinking about that, and I just happened to know Mr. Santini, who was good friends with my parents, Paul and Nancy Ingersall. They were the beginners of a church in a little town called Brevard, North Carolina. Back in the day when they used to have branch Sabbath schools, I don't know if you ever heard that term or not. But that church was on the verge of closing. They had 10 members left. And they were meeting in this little white country church, just like you'd see in the pictures. And so I asked them, I said, are you all interested in having some life in your church? Well, sure. What do you mean? Well, I have some young people that are looking for a church. And they said, bring them on. Hallelujah. You know what happened? I went back to those seniors and I said, you want a church? Yeah. And I said, you have one. But now you've got to teach the young people in their little classes. I think there was 2 young people there. You have to give the sermon. You have to take up the offerings. You have to stay for potluck and help with outreach. And they said, sign me up. And I took a busload of those kids for 2 years, Sabbath after Sabbath, and they helped that church make it. And here's what it is today. This little church on the hill out there, debt-free, with 50 members or so. Young people can take care of business. We've got to use them, or we are losing them. George Barna surveyed 602 teens about where they saw themselves in 10 years in relationship to future religious activities. This is a critical piece that you need to be aware of. Here's what he found. 60% of the teens surveyed said, if I am actively involved in the church now, I will still be involved in 10 years. Now that makes sense, doesn't it? Here's the other part. Only 14% of those not actively involved in the church now said they would be actively involved in 10 years. We're seeing that. So, here's the kicker. An engaged future is predicated on an active present. Don't expect them when they have a job and they're card-carrying, tithe-paying Seventh-day Adventists that they're going to be here. They'll be long gone by then. We have to use them now. And here's a challenge. 2 quotes that I need to share with you. Satan is making an earnest, persevering efforts to corrupt the minds and debase the character of every youth. And shall we, who have more experience, stand as mere spectators and see him accomplish his purpose without hindrance? Let us stand at our posts as Minutemen to work for these youth, and through the help of God, hold them back from the pit of destruction. That is the challenge that we face today. When the youth come to our churches, they should not be made to feel that they have come among strangers who do not care about their souls. We must guard them, fighting back Satan, that he shall not take them out of our arms. There should be fathers and mothers in Israel who will watch for their souls as they that must give an account. Brethren and sisters, do not hold yourselves aloof from the youth as if you had no particular concern for responsibility for them. You who have long professed to be Christians have a work to do, patiently, kindly, to lead them in the right way. I challenge you to do that, and I thank you for having done that, for the lives that you have changed in the past. But we cannot rest upon the successes of the past. We have to continue to help those young people that are amongst us. Because there will come a day when Jesus will look at us and say, what about those lambs that were amongst you? Where are they today? The mental and physical suffering. This is from Mother Teresa, and I thought it was very appropriate. The mental and physical suffering from hunger, from homelessness, from all kinds of diseases is a problem today. But the greatest suffering is being lonely, feeling unloved, having no one. I have come more and more to realize that it is being unwanted that is the worst disease that any human being can ever experience. It appears that over 50% of our young people are feeling like they suffer from this disease. I can tell you the world accepts them with open arms, and they have a place for every last one of them. And I don't know if you ever have heard the commercials or saw the show that was called Cheers. Do you remember that theme song? Where everybody knows your name. Do you know the names of your young people? Do you welcome them to church every Sabbath? If they're not there, when they come back, you say, I missed you. To hear your name called makes a difference. So I ask you, what are the hopes and the dreams and your prayers for the young people that attend your church today? Would it not be to find their place in God's work? Would it not be to see them welcomed into the kingdom of God? That is the goal. I submit to you to be the invitation. That they would see in you an invitation to Jesus Christ. Some people that say, well, what can I do? I'm going to give you 3 simple things. The first thing, get to know the names of 3 young people in your church and welcome them every week. Make that your responsibility. And then find one of them that you decide that you will personally mentor along the way. I don't know about you, but when I grew up, it took the whole church to raise me. And thank the Lord they were willing. And by His grace, I'm able to stand here today. It was not anything of my own doings. But everybody worked together to make it happen. And then finally, to ensure that the young people are involved in the mission and the management of the church. They have to understand why this church exists, how they can contribute to what goes on here. Is there a place for them? So let's make sure. Put them on the board. They'll have incredible ideas you've never thought about. They will change how you do business here. They will challenge you in ways that you've never been challenged before to be involved in God's work. I want to say to you, my friends, today, Jesus is coming soon. Prepare yourselves, prepare your children.